KwaZulu-Natal's infrastructure took a knock when the deadly floods destroyed infrastructure and property. Repairs to roads damaged in April floods are yet to begin, while parts of the province don't have a stable water supply. eNCA Senior Reporter Dasen Thathiah is in Durban and joins us this morning. Good morning, Dasen. So still quite a bit of work to be done. People don't have water and infrastructure has not actually been rebuilt. Talk to us about the situation now.
Well, in fairness, there has been a lot of work that's been done. We've seen some movement in that space, some of the water infrastructure being restored, some of the housing that's been allocated now to the flood victims. But the criticism will always be that it's not happening fast enough. And I think when one starts to have these conversations with people that are affected, they also start questioning things like whether the city had planned for this, whether we take natural disasters into account when planning things like housing and the infrastructure, and whether we can cope with the increased number of people that are coming into our cities. Now, this is the conversation that I want to have with Kavi Soni. He's joining me now. He's a town planner that's been working in the city. You've got more than 20 years experience, so you are familiar with the landscape that we are talking about. I think I'm going to ask you a question that has come up many times since the floods, Kavi, is whether the city had done enough to plan for a natural disaster like this, and secondly, whether we are also coping with the increased number of people that are in the city. Essentially, could the death toll and the damage have been far lower?
Dasen, thanks. So I think we need to contextualize the question, and we need to understand what the landscape of the South African planning and development environment is like. Post-1994, there's no doubt what our democratic government inherited was a fractured spatial pattern. There was segregation of communities. There were certain areas that were better planned than others. And post-1994, there's been a significant amount of growth. There's been an influx of people, and eThekwini, like any other metropole globally, is a bit of a magnet for people to look for work opportunities, job opportunities, because that's where opportunities exist. So in doing so, the challenge for urban planners like ourselves and for the decision makers like the eThekwini municipality and government, they've got to anticipate and plan for urbanization, for densification, for creating compact urban settlements that can deal with the challenges that the spatial environment throws at them. But that having been said, and I think it's important to note that, you know, normally in the planning and development fraternity, from an engineering point of view, ordinarily what is designed from an infrastructure point of view, and to be specific, water is a yardstick of between a 1 in 50 and a 1 in 100 year flood, which means in the last 50 or 100 years, what is the worst level of flooding that has occurred in terms of the volume of water. And it would be remiss of me not to point out that the flooding that occurred this year, it was unheard of. It was a volume of rain over a few days that has never been, it's unprecedented. So no amount of planning can cater for that eventuality. And I think that's important. But notwithstanding that, the impact that has had on the urban landscape and rural landscape could have, in my view, been lessened had there been, for example, and I think this is no secret, there has been, unfortunately, a lack of proper maintenance and upgrading of infrastructure. And that's a national problem. It's not just an eThekwini problem.
I want to come in here. Where does that leave us now? Because the question we're finding more frequently is, if this were to happen again in the next year or next 2 years, would it be worse? So in that planning space, do you think enough consideration is now being given to what you're talking about? For example, maintenance. Are you seeing that?
So you know, as an urban planner, we sort of deal with the spatial location of things. And there's a miasma of disciplines that inform spatial planning. So right now what I think is happening is there's a band-aid being put on to try and address an immediate need. I'm not sure if enough is being done at this point in time, because remember, it's still fresh, the wound is still fresh, and I'm not sure if enough is being done by the decision-making bodies to put in place ameliorative measures to prevent the recurrence should this happen again. But notwithstanding that, again, talking about development and development planning, so spatial planning is informed by primarily the positioning of where things should be located, where you work, where you play, where you live. But that doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's informed by elements like environmental concerns. And on environmental concerns, I think it's pertinent to point out that within the city, the areas that were hardest hit in terms of loss of homes and loss of lives were those informal settlements. And informal settlements are unplanned settlements. You know, people out of desperation locate on what they perceive to be a convenient location or an available space. But that space is not ideally suited for people to live. So the impacts on them in such instances as a result of them being unplanned settlements are significantly more to those that are planned. So the question being, is enough being done? I think there are legal frameworks in place, there are guidelines in place, there are standards in place. Whether those standards meet with the need to cater for future occurrences is where the question mark is. And I am not sure at this point in time whether the decision-making bodies are saying, listen guys, planning for a 1 in 50-year flood or 100-year flood is not good enough. We need to do more. Insofar as environmental concerns are taken into consideration, what are we doing to enforce and to prevent the proliferation of more informal settlements? What are we doing to accelerate housing development for those that are so desperate for housing? Sure. So there's a whole lot of questions, and it boils down to the will. You know, South Africa has a number of plans, and starting at national level, we have something called the National Development Plan, and that plan was put in place with a 50-year trajectory. And it says that provided we follow what's set out in that spatial plan and we align to it, we are then moving towards spatial integration and doing things in a more integrated fashion. But as we know, every 5 years we have elections at national, local and provincial government and local government, and with each changing of the political guard, the political will seems to foreshadow the planning will.